I have so many questions right now. I want to change our storyboard.
We're like, guys, this is what we had planned to do. And now the new agenda is...
Very good afternoon and hello from my side. My name is Gaurav Tomar. I serve as a CMO for the German Indian Forum, which is a not-for-profit organization listed in Munich. And as part of my day job, I work as automotive industry manager at MathWorks, who are the makers of MATLAB and Simulink. So GIBF, in short, so German Indian Business Forum, is organized in Munich since past 5 years, and it's supported by the Bavarian Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy and Technology, the City of Munich, the Confederation of Indian Industries, and the German Asia Pacific Business Association. This forum, so we focused on several topics in the past, and this time, of course, because of the current scenario, we have moved all the activities to virtual setting, to online, and this year we are focusing on smart logistics and mobility. So this event in conversation with is an event series where we invite industry experts like Arunima. Today we'll be talking about social business. It's a very, very exciting topic, especially because I didn't know anything about social business in general and the theory behind it. So as an engineer, I'm really, really excited to know all about it, know all about the first principles of social business. So Arunima, very, very glad to have you today on this event. Let me just give people some housekeeping rules first, and then we can get on with it. So you are being recorded. I mean, up to you, but this session is being recorded. So you will also be able to listen to this session afterwards on our YouTube channel. If you would like to ask questions to us, please use the Q&A panel, not the chat panel. Chat is just meant for any issues that you may have. I'll try to cater to those issues, and that's it. So let's get started. So Arunima, why don't you give us a short introduction of who you are and what is Yunus social business all about?
Cool. Thank you so much, Gaurav. And something that we were discussing even early on, that since we are a much smaller group, at any point of time, if people who are listening in, if you have any questions, please shoot Gaurav a message, because I think he's going to be faster looking at it. And I'll be happy to jump on those questions as they come. So super briefly to kick it off, my name is Arunima Singh. I am originally from, Lucknow in India. And I've been working with the organization that I'm part of, Social Business right now for the past 6 years. Personally, I used to be a consultant in my previous lifetime, when I realized that I would rather be using my love for efficiency and processes to create impact in the world as opposed to make the rich get richer. And that's when I left consulting to find a bigger purpose and to create impact in life. And I ran a nonprofit. I did a lot of really small and big things that would help us create or leave the world a better place, to which then I was introduced to a book by Muhammad Yunus, which is called as Banker to the Poor. Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for the concept of microfinance. Microfinance originated in Bangladesh, where he started initially by lending $42 to an entire village, where women were using that amount to buy daily supplies, vegetables, fruits, go out to the market and sell it. They didn't have access to banking systems, so they had to then take this money from loan sharks, and that was then given back to them at 101% interest rate. So Muhammad Yunus started microfinance as a concept, as a small banking system. And we are just the legacy of microfinance. The organization that I work for is called as Yunus Social Business. We work in the sector of impact investments, but also really looking at how can the global social problems that we have today be solved by the power of business. So the other side of philanthropy, everything, our mission is whatever problem you give us, we will solve it with a business so that it's a more sustainable and cyclic way of creating impact. I can really go on, Gaurav, but I will let you go on.
This is good because this gives me a lot of meat to chew on and then ask further questions. So we've been also earlier discussing about the possibility. So the priorities of I'll call it YSB in short. Is that fine? Mm-hmm. So in this year, you've mentioned that you're calling your priorities and the way you're doing business this year as business as unusual. So why is that? What is what's the reasoning behind this internal priority?
So to give the background of why we coined business as unusual and why is that our love and mission for this year and the years going forward is historically.
Yeah. So what I'm particularly interested in is what's so unusual now? Mm-hmm. Of course, beyond the obvious that we can't go out and go about our business in the same way that we used to. What else is unusual?
So other than the COVID situation and the global crisis, the unusual aspect is the momentum that we've seen built in the past 1 decade. I remember when I joined the industry and when we started the organization 12 years ago now, we were the only people who were showing up in conferences or in business meetings saying that, hi, your business or your product should be creating an impact on the triple bottom line. You cannot, no matter what industry you are, create products that are leaving a negative impact on the planet and people. And well, nobody was listening, or people were listening and were like, this is interesting. Maybe what you're talking about is corporate social responsibility. Over the period of time, we have seen the businesses and people who form those businesses, which is mostly the employees, really have a change in the mindset of what do they want to be using their time and lives for. And it's a super interesting conversation to say that now most of the companies that we talk to or are working with, they're very, very aware of the impact that they are creating in people, profits, and planet's lives. And how, if this is not sustainable, it is really not good for business. We have moved our narrative, as has a lot of impact space. We've moved our narrative in the aspect of saying, hi, this is philanthropy, you should do this, other than saying that this is good for business. This is the only and the most sustainable way of doing business, and this is the only way that you will continue getting employees in future. People will keep buying your products, and you will be relevant for the future generations to come. One of the terms that we use in the space a lot is business case for impact. And there is incredible data. My team went out last year and they did a research with more than 100 companies globally to talk about this business case for impact. That if you are looking at your business for it to create an impact on the triple bottom line, it is great business. I mean, we've got more than 75% of companies' employees have said that we stay with this company because of this wonderful impact that they're creating, and not so much for the final product. Their consumers are much more inclined into saying that we buy this product because we know that you're doing good for the planet and people. In all the different aspects, no matter what vertical that we went out at research, we got incredibly good quantitative and qualitative data to say that impact is not just for social responsibility. It's not a sideline. It is the main product of a business.
Yeah. So as a layman, I would assume that businesses are set up to create impact, right? Mm-hmm. It's probably not always the central idea because of that impact being impact on people's lives, and probably that's the secret sauce of businesses actually being successful or not. Is that the right assumption?
Yeah, it's a very fair point, Gaurav, because and this is something that Professor Yunus says all the time, is that there shouldn't be a need for a separate coined term called a social business. All businesses are inherently and should inherently be social. Mm-hmm. The only difference with how businesses initially started to where we are right now is that our visions, our key metrics changed. we started looking for stakeholder growth. We started looking for evaluations a lot earlier than we started looking for, are our people happy? And that is where this entire aspect changed. And for us, we honestly, like 20 years, 30 years from now, we don't want to exist as an organization. We would want all businesses to be social, and this need to push people into being a social business shouldn't be there at all. There is an inherent way of a business to work where it has the potential to create impact. It's just a matter of saying that if the values are different than how they started. And that being said, like one of the values of social business, like Professor Yunus has 5 different terms of how one can define and justify a social business. And one of the biggest ones is this, that a social business will not take dividends out of the company to give it back to the stakeholders. The idea is that the stakeholders would give their capital investment back, but they're not going to get richer out of that company. The idea is that if all the profits, every margin that you make would go back into a social cause, or like a cooperative would be equally split between everyone.
So you talked about stakeholder, and I know I'm so I'm allowing myself to deviate from a few things that I have lined up. So you brought up stakeholder as the term, and no dividends for stakeholders. So, but that begs a question in my brain: who is the stakeholder in a usual business setting, and who is the stakeholder in a social business setting?
It's a very fair point to say that what is the difference between the stakeholders. So I can even narrow it more. Let's talk only about shareholders. So right now in COVID times, when companies were releasing 30% of their workforce, it's because they were looking at the shareholder valuation of saying that we need to continue making money. Our shareholders, who most likely do not work with the organization, need X amount of returns at the end of the year. In a very parallel track, in case of the social business, their shareholders were either impact investors like ourselves, or in most likely cases, the employees themselves. And then the interest of the shareholder is that we want this company to be successful. We want the company to be there for the next decade, 2 decades. And we would rather take a pay cut rather than fire 30 to 40% of the workforce. And then the metric and the intent that you have behind running a business is more sustainability, longevity. Make sure that returns are equally distributed, as opposed to saying a certain group of people need and their needs need to be met.
Okay. And so okay, that's all right. So, and what about the people, right? So that aren't they the primary stakeholders in all of this? Especially, so again, from an outside in perspective, social business for me is for the people, or the whatever product you have, product or service or anything that you're doing in your business is pointed towards the benefit of people at large, which is basically the definition of social good. So using best use of commons, right? So what I'm still struggling to find is where are people in all of this? Do they have a say? If yes, how?
And when you talk about people, just for me to understand, are you talking about people who are the beneficiaries, people who are in the supply chain, or in each of these categories?
That's a very good point. Yeah, so that's a good perspective on it. Actually, what I was just focused on was the end consumers, but now that you bring in, definitely it makes sense, and especially supply chain, people in the supply chain who are making the business possible are probably also very, very important stakeholders. Yeah. So do you look at every piece of this, and could you give some examples of where you've done something like that?
Yeah. So the entire aspect of how would we run a social business is very much related to the fact, and I use these terms very, very interchangeably. Like when we start talking about human-centric innovation, It's for me everything that is happening in a social business, because then we are not just focused on the final beneficiaries who would benefit, but we would also be talking about the customers. We would be talking about people who are out there selling to these customers, every part of the value chain. And this is an inherent problem in the impact space, that impact space is run by super good intents, but when you look at individuals who are actively working in the impact space, they might not be that exactly happy, because we are so focused on everybody who's a beneficiary that we really are not worried about people who are working. So we have maximum amount of burnouts in the impact space because people are just super passionate and they're not really worried about themselves. And that's where, like, no matter where you are in whatever place, if you're more human centric, you will have the potential to create more impact. So if you look at any social business, the final aspect of what you're selling and the beneficiaries, that is actively being taken care of, let's say, the board. Like, it is very important to say that our impact numbers continue being met. And whenever push comes to a shove, that is going to be taken care of. The social business mandates on its own that how are employees being taken, etc. That is part of the articles of association of a company. So that is on structural and procedural way, that is what's being looked after. So at any given point of time, it is absolutely essential that whatever the business has to create a profit. We are profit driven, but we are impact first. So when push comes to a shove, we would rather be looking at people as opposed to profit. That doesn't mean that it needs to be different, that it can't make money. It can make great amount of profits. It's just a matter of saying that it takes longer time because you're trying to balance both the aspects in the same goal.
Right. And if you would, I mean, I know end of the day you do work for a company, right? So so I don't know what you can talk about, but if you can give an example of maybe such, so you talked about human-centric innovation. So maybe an example of where you've seen that work really well in a corporate setting.
I can give you it's one of my favorite examples, actually. Like, one of the super cool examples, which is definitely not associated with us or a social business, and if anybody wants to read, it should be Patagonia. And when we were setting
the sports
company,
okay,
exactly. And when we were setting ourselves up as a company, we were like, we really want to be like an organization, but we couldn't find another equally impact first organization. And Patagonia was very close. The guy who started Patagonia, Yves Chenard, he's written a wonderful book which is called as Let My People Go Surfing. And it talks a lot about corporate values and keeping people first and not being profits driven, but really purpose driven. And with that scale, they have been able to do so much more, and they are so much more central as a product as opposed to anything else. But I can talk out of our portfolio and the work and our network. One of my favorite examples is run by Novartis in India. Novartis runs something called as Arogya Parivar. And there, the vision of that was to provide last mile primary health access to rural India. And the intent was super human centric to say that people in rural India are not coming to tier 3 cities, because coming into a city for a medical service takes you one day job and money. And if people aren't coming to healthcare service providers, how do we make sure that healthcare service providers go out there? So Novartis runs an entire campaign of healthcare educators where people who don't have, let's say, a medical training, but are trained to recognize first aid symptoms, blood pressure, prenatal symptoms, to go out and make sure that people are aware of what they should be looking at. They then have healthcare coordinators who are trained in medical services to go and provide these services. For them, it is a matter of saying that, yes, we are providing primary healthcare, which the government is not able to provide. But for them, it's really market access as well. It is definitely a business potential to say that how do you make sure that your product is there in last mile rural India? And something that I quote very often is that if we have Coca-Cola in last mile India, why do we not have paracetamol? Because it's not a product problem, it's a logistics problem. Like, there's not enough margin for paracetamol to show up in last mile rural India. There is definitely margin in Coca-Cola for that to happen. And that's where and this is just one of the examples. I just think Arogya Parivar is a brilliant aspect because of the scale that they work at. But wherever you would find, let's say, a dead economy where there isn't a lot of profits to be made, that's such a hunting ground for social businesses to work, because then you can really invest into setting up the structures and then taking it forward. That's also one of the reasons that we set up corporate initiatives within YSB's side. The work that I do is only and 100% with corporates, is because in a lot of these dead economies, somebody needs to foot the cost of setting up structures.
Yeah, I think that's what you said, right? So is there a margin in the business for the last mile? If that margin isn't there, then this funding for going the last mile comes internally from internal funds, and that's where the willingness of the corporate organization and the board should come in, because this would come out of their own pockets. I mean, not their pockets, but the company's pockets. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the beauty of the entire thing, that it doesn't technically go on a company's P&L. It is a capex investment that they have an opportunity to take back in 7 to 8 years. And this is the clear aspect of the entire social business, as a principle that we would only set up a social business when it's profitable and will be able to give you your investment back. There are cases where we also talk of return of investment when certain impact metrics are met. But with any social business investment, you should be able to get your initial investment back, plus the incremental impact that you've been able to create in an ecosystem.
Okay.
I'm trying to
capex would then also, because what's easier to get, getting capex sanctioned or opex sanctioned?
Capex, definitely capex sanctioned, because opex, it's usually like one of the examples is that we have a recycling plant in India in joint venture with a German company, and their capex is way higher, and getting a debt investment for capex is really impossible in the India market. For OPEX, you can definitely go out and look for OPEX debt capital. And that is much easier to look at than capex. The initial first amount is where social entrepreneurs would really struggle, because it's a much higher amount. And for companies, it's just a matter of saying that instead of using that budget for CSR this year, we are going to invest in a business which would give us incremental and sustainable impact for the next years.
Okay. So I'm just making notes because it was so interesting. I'm going to read about a lot of stuff later. But so this provides me a good segue into one of the next questions that I thought I'd ask you. And you talked about social entrepreneurs right now. So could you give an example? So we've talked about some examples on the corporate side. So there's this whole chain, or not a chain, but the whole area of social entrepreneurship. So could you give an example which is maybe really close to your heart, not directly connected to Yunus as a contributor, but in general, what you've observed in the industry? So
many. Like if you or anybody in our lovely audience are interested in reading more about it, the Yunus Social Business website has our portfolio, so you can definitely look at the portfolio companies that we invest in. But one of my favorite examples is somebody that I worked with a few years ago. Her name is Ajeta Shah, and she is based out of Rajasthan, India. And she runs a company called as Frontier Markets. And Frontier Markets provide last mile access, energy access to women in rural India. And why I love the story so much is the transition of what the company has gone through. And this, for me, is what any business, any startup would go through, social or not. They started with microfinance routes. Ajeta used to work for SKS Microfinance, which doesn't have the best reputation in India. And with microfinance, they realized that there is so much potential in the hub and spoke model of women working in collectives. And with this collective, they were able to get a lot of raw data, but also understand the demands and the needs of rural India. And where the question was that it's not that rural India couldn't afford to buy a television. It was the aspect of saying that television makers weren't really interested or able to provide to rural India. And they're like, how do we solve that distribution problem? And right now, what Frontier Markets does is that it works with more than 50,000 women in hub and spoke model, where these women are groups, they're collective, they're called as Sahelis, and they get a credit line to purchase items from different organizations to then go out in rural India and sell them. And they've been doing this for like almost 5-6 years now. And somewhere in between, they realize that they have fantastic market intelligence to also know what does rural India want. So now they're also doing a reverse osmosis where they go out and test out products for Siemens, Philips, to say, if you're doing a solar lighting product for rural any place, let us test this product out for you. You will get super quick data on will this ever work or not. And now they're working with combinations with corporates to say that how do you work in parallel to get better products out in the market that would serve these Sahelis. And when we were working with Ajayata, when I was working with Ajayata 2 years ago, we really came across this thing of saying that the next best step for a company like that would be to be in lines of somebody like Amazon. Amazon has access to tier 2 cities. When it goes into tier 3 or last mile, they have no distribution network. And this is fantastic distribution network in general. And this is a model that was tried by Unilever, Hindustan Unilever in India. They're called as Shakti Ammas. And they tried something super similar. But for Unilever, they didn't look at Shakti Ammas as an aspect of distribution line, but they were a parallel product. And they are still active, but Frontier Markets works only as a product that they have this network, and these women are
so I guess assets. Unilever was about Unilever products, right? Whereas the Frontier Markets is product agnostic.
Exactly, what people need. And they actually went a step further and they started doing their own production because they did not like the quality of the solar products that were coming at that point of time from China. So now they have their own production capacity and a product portfolio of 5 products, and the rest they buy from the market and they sell.
Okay, and this could be any products.
Any products. So they, like when COVID started, that was one of the things that they have a need, they have the money, because a lot of people from metropolitan cities went back home to rural India, and they're like, the money is there, but distribution just wouldn't come in.
Right. Okay.
And it's like they've really revamped their course in COVID times as well. They've set up a new credit line with Women's Banking, which is a IMF subsidiary in India, to provide credit line to women in India.
Okay.
To really look at this data that when women are given access to finance, what happens. So super exciting things. If any of you is interested, Ajayata's on LinkedIn. Please connect with her. She's doing fantastic work.
This is very interesting. Yes, we should. Guys, please do. So at this juncture, I want to
talk.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go. Something irrelevant. Go.
I just wanted to open up for questions, and because we are a smaller group this time, so what I'm going to do is Yogini, Harsha, and others, I'm going to unmute you guys. So if you have a question, you don't have to speak, but if you have a question, you can.
You'll be forced to. We'll call attendance. So, hi, Yogini, do you have a question for us?
I do have a question.
I'm so happy, Yogini. Otherwise, like, this is such a shit move, Arunima. Let's just randomly
you
call
picked on the right person. Okay, so my question, Arunima, is what I'm finding is with the pandemic and the economic impact, I'm finding it hard to sell the triple bottom line concept, right? So I'm, among other things that I do, I'm also a founding member for Diversify, which is an organization committed to gender diverse companies and organizations. And what I hear immediately when I go to companies with this thought is, oh, we're too busy focusing on the bottom line, on profits, and come back to us about people and planet. Do you have an argument for why companies should not be doing this? And that, that is.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very fair point, Yogini, and thank you for mentioning this. I have extremely strong views on this opinion, and since this is being recorded, I wouldn't share my strong ones, but I can share the politically correct ones. One of the things that we've realized in our conversations with companies where they say they don't have time or this is not their mandate right now is that we actively chose not to fight that battle, that our fight is not to convert the non-converted, but our fight is to look at the ones who have already taken the step 1 to push them into at a step 100 and step away. So we are really looking at the ones who are already talking or are at least aware that they might not be answering all the questions. The ones who still think that having a non-inclusive, non-diverse, and a non-impactful company works well, we will speak to them eventually in a year or two when they have come onto that realization. But that's something that we don't 100% like dedicate ourselves to. But I totally hear your concern around that they're really not ready to have this conversation. And for us, our conversations are now really on business metrics. Like I get asked this often that, do you speak in impact terms? Do you speak in the donut theory and all this joy? And I'm like, we really don't. Like none of us have an impact background. We just have business and consulting background, and all we talk is business. So when we have these conversations with our clients, we're like, you should be more diverse and inclusive, not because it's the right thing to do, but it is the only most sufficient and sustainable way of running a business. So there is business metrics. There's fantastic data out there to give you this context on if you have run a more diverse and inclusive workforce, what kind of productivity levels you have, what kind of incremental raise in your final metrics do you have. And then it's like we have an opportunity to relate that to clear business metrics, and that really catches people's eye. Because then you're not selling an emotional story. What you're selling is a great business story, which is the right way of doing business. And with diversity and inclusion, we talk about this often. Like one of my teams is actually doing a research on how does being more diverse and inclusive make companies more innovative. And it's super interesting to see how relevant that is. Because
I would be really interested into that because in general, I think I've been in Germany for 10 years now, and off late, what I'm seeing is probably since last 2 years. It's not very old, so it's a very, very recent trend where almost every big company is talking about diversity and inclusivity and inclusiveness. But I don't know. So why I would be interested in that research in general is because I don't know how much of this is marketing and how much of this is actual real impact in the organization of making the workforce diverse. So probably it would be, it's definitely very worthwhile to look at how deep do the roots go of diversity and inclusiveness in the workforce, and what's the kind of impact that generates.
No, absolutely. And I'm assuming.
But I also find it sad. So finally, completing my sentence, I find it sad that there's a need for such kind of research. Why do you need to justify diversity and inclusivity through impact?
So I think on the research side, I'm sure Yogini would have much better data on why is diversity and inclusivity more important in a business. But from our perspective, it is when we work with organizations, it's really a matter of saying that what is the organizational purpose and what is the purpose of the people who are part of it. Because we inherently believe that organizations weren't meant to create negative social impact on the society, but it is when people are just detached with the purpose of their being and the work that they're doing, they will go ahead and make decisions that are not in the best interest of anyone. And a lot of our work and our partners' work, we actively work with super cool organizations who work in this aspect, is to say, are people bringing their 100% at work? And are they super engaged with what they're doing? And that is where the diversity question comes in, because I don't think it's difficult to have a diverse workforce, to hire for a diverse workforce. I think it's difficult to retain a diverse workforce. If you can hire 50% women in your organization, you can hire 50% from minority communities in your organization. If you can't keep them, then that's a cultural problem. And if you can't keep them, then you start having these questions around all the business metrics to say that are people allowed to be more innovative when they have maybe not great ideas, but ideas in general? Are you accepting to the ideas? How accepting are you to people making more mistakes? So it's a much bigger cultural question, but it does yield very, very business metrics. Thank you for your question, Yogini.
Yeah, thanks, Arunima. I like the idea of mirroring the same vocabulary, right, to get the other side on board. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Then probably one of my very last questions that I still want to ask, because I think this would be relevant to me as well. So what are your top 3 tips? I think you gave out one already. So mirroring the same language. I'm not talking about not taking the impact language, rather the business and consulting terminology. What are your thoughts and your top three advice points for people who are looking to start in the social business area?
I think starting in a social business area, I wouldn't want to look at social business as a sector in general. What I would want to look at is business as a sector. And that's something that I actively talk to people around when I go into sessions like this or anywhere that I meet them at coffee shops, is that the social business as a sector is super inspiring. But we don't need people to come into the sector. What we want people to do is be in their sector and make it more impactful. So no matter what business you are in, you have the potential of creating a positive social impact in your vertical. And that is where we need inspired people to be. Impact Space is full of inspired people that are not related to a business. What we need is to transfer some of them on the business side to say that please stay in your businesses and create impact. And for that, the only suggestions, recommendations that we have is that people like us, my organization, and people in the impact space, we're literally there to make sure that businesses create more impact and reach out and connect. And people would always be happy to help, to say that whatever business problem you're solving, let us give you a more impactful view of it. That no matter what you choose to do, I really I have never been given a product where I'm like, oh, we can't create impact. No matter what your product is, you will be able to look at that product in a more purpose-driven way, in a more human-centric way, to leave a lasting impact, as opposed to just a product that is not, if not negatively, is not doing anything. So no matter where we are, in any space, we have an opportunity to do something more and extra. And there are plenty of people doing it. So you're in good hands.
Okay, so you're talking about good hands. So probably it's also a good time to maybe just tell us how YSB works. So how do you guys stay afloat? How do you make money to at least stay afloat? And what's the models that you work with?
So YSB on its own, for no better term, we act as a consulting firm.
Okay.
Where we work as consultants with organizations who want to work in one of the 5 product lines that we have to create a positive social impact in their business chain. As I mentioned earlier, we work specifically with businesses who have at its intent to become more impactful at its center and not as a +1 addition. And with that, we look at their purpose strategies. We help them execute that or implement that purpose into their employees' day-to-day lives. That could be with internal programs or external programs. And finally, we have a venture build studio, which I lead, with the intent of building smaller products or business units for global corporates, where they then can own a smaller social business and we step away as a consulting firm.
So helping entrepreneurship within companies.
Definitely. So that is one of our product offerings, which is to help entrepreneurs, because we also fiercely believe that nobody knows the business sector better than the company's employees. So we're not going to come in and say, oh, let us solve that problem for you. We would just give us impact angle to it. And on the venture build side, we also do actively partner, depending upon the capacities of the corporate. We also do actively partner with the corporate to say that we can run 100% of your venture and you will just take it over when it's up and running, or we share responsibility 50-50 with the corporate partners and structure it.
And that would be in this time horizon of, that time horizon would vary, right? But like we were initially talking about 7 to 8 years of capital return. So is that something standard, or?
It really depends on what kind of capex investment is there. So our time horizon of us working is never more than 12 months. Okay. That's our vision, that we will go from ideation to product launch in 12 months. And after the 12 months, we step away and the product or the joint venture is 100% in the ownership of the corporate. The capital return is, since it is on the corporate's P&L, they get a return, they get their investment back in 7 to 8 years, depending upon what the investment is. My average benchmark of 7 to 8 is coming from an impact investment. That's what's called as patient capital. That the investment you do to set up a structure, and then in 7 to 8 years, you get a return back. In a lot of cases, you get it much earlier, depending upon how strong the ecosystem is or what networks do you have.
Right. Got it. Okay. Awesome. So why I'm pausing? Because I'm actually taking notes.
You have the recording, Gaurav.
I do, but I wouldn't have the time to go back to the recording and then listen to stuff again, right? So I'm just making notes.
So guys, thank you for joining the call, which Gaurav wanted to do for his benefit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is great. So I think I strongly believe in the most insightful conversations are those where you actually are forced to do further reading and further thinking. So this conversation definitely checks all the boxes. And if I'm taking notes, that's because I would definitely like to read about what is donut theory, what is the triple bottom line, because I don't know what triple bottom line is, and I was afraid to ask that. So yeah, I'm just making notes, and I think this has been, at least for me personally, this has been very enriching conversation, and I hope for the others who are on the call as well.